Good morning. Will you stand and worship with us? We're going to welcome God in this place. God, we hope that your spirit comes here and that we get to see your power this morning. God, we want to see your glory. God, let our praises be pleasing to you. Every word that we sing, every thought that we have. Our Father, our Father, all of heaven roars your name, your glory. Let this place erupt with praise. Can you hear it? The sounds of heaven touching earth.
Like me, oh,
can see the love in your eyes. You're laying yourself down. You're raising up the broken to life. God, let that be ringing in our hearts every day, that you're bringing us to life, God. We pray that your Spirit just overcomes this campus, that your grace is known by every student, every faculty. God, I pray that as we listen to Eric speak, that you give us boldness, and that your Spirit gives us power, and that we feel that as we go out into the world. In your name we pray, amen.
It's good to be here with you guys this morning. Glad to see that most of you returned, so I guess I didn't do too bad yesterday. Again, for the sake of time, I want to jump right in. Yesterday we talked about strongholds in our culture, and strongholds, biblically speaking, were defined as beliefs, ideas, reasonings, philosophies, presuppositions that go against the knowledge of God. So today I want to go through 3 examples of strongholds in our culture, and it would help if I had this plugged in. Strongholds in our culture that have not only infiltrated our culture and are rampant in our culture, but have infiltrated our church as well, and our way of thinking. You may have heard of these described as worldviews, and go over the three dominant ones. The first one would be what's called relativism or Post-Modernism, which is essentially the position that truth is relative. There is no absolute truth. There is no right or wrong. There is no objectively way of verifying anything that is true because there is no truth. So if you're against same-sex marriage, don't have one. If you're against abortion, don't have one. But don't tell me I can't. And the way a person might go about articulating this position might say something like this. Suppose I'm standing here and I say, there's a dog to the right of the podium, but somebody in front of me over here says, no, there's a dog to the left of the podium. Who's right and who's wrong? Oh, we're both right. It just depends on what perspective you're looking at. Before we get into the responses for these, the next one is Scientism. Note ism. It's not about science. It's a belief about knowledge. It's Scientism, and it's the view that the only way to gain knowledge is through science. In fact, they might even go as far as to say if it cannot be proven scientifically, then either cannot be known or cannot be true. So until you can provide some type of scientific evidence for something like God or anything supernatural, then I cannot believe it. And if there's no scientific evidence to back up a belief, then it's likely not true, because science is the best or perhaps only way we can gain knowledge about reality. If you want your heart tickled and you want your heart warmed and your feelings and these butterflies in your stomach, go find religion. If you want facts and evidence and to learn about reality, study science. I saw a t-shirt that once said, if you're too stupid to understand science, try religion. And it's this view that science is the only way to gain truth about reality. The third one, and here's where I want to spend a little bit more time on, is what's called naturalism. And it's the view that the physical world is all that exists, nothing more, nothing less. I want to tell you a little bit about how I got into apologetics. And it was specifically because of this worldview here. Freshman year of college, I took my first philosophy class, and first semester, and I later came to find my professor was an atheist. While I learned a lot in his class, and it was very cordial and even-handed, I wanted to take another course in philosophy the next semester. And everybody told me, if you're going to take another class, whatever you do, do not take Professor Peña's class, because he's going to try and make you lose your faith. He's very antagonistic towards Christianity. He's condescending. He's a smart aleck. He's going to try to make you look stupid if you ask a question. Whatever you do, don't take his class, because you'll probably lose your faith. And I said, sign me up. Not because I wanted to lose my faith, but because in my mind, call me crazy, but I was raised to believe that all truth is grounded in God, so I should not be afraid to learn something, because if it's true, it's not going to point away from God, but to God. Nevertheless, I also understood in my mind, if Christianity is not true, I need to know why. But if it is true, I equally need to know why as well, and maybe this is the guy for the job. I want to give you an example of what class was like. One day he walks into class, sits at his desk, and he pretends like he's holding up this antidepressant pill. And he says, now religion wants us to believe in something like a soul. And because of the soul, we can have hope in an afterlife, of seeing our relatives that have passed away, and we can be in heaven with God for eternity. So, but the problem is, the soul is something that's not physical. We don't even know, they don't even know how to describe it, but it's something that's not physical. And allegedly in your soul is where your emotions and your mood and all these things are contained. Your mind is in there. But here's the problem. If the soul's not physical, then how is it that if I took this antidepressant pill, which is physical, how is it the case that something tiny and physical can affect the allegedly immaterial? Because if I take something like an antidepressant pill or take some type of hallucinate drugs, my moods, possibly behavior, my mindset, and my states of awareness will drastically change. And how do you explain that? Because the problem is every time we look at the brain, all we see are neurons firing, and every time we look at the body, all you see are the base compounds of things like carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but you never find anything like a soul. Why is that? How do we explain that? He says, I'll tell you how you explain it. He says, it's simple. Because there is no soul, there is no God, there is no heaven, there is no hell, there is no afterlife. We're just a brain and body, a physical meat machine, and we need to learn to live with that fact, get on with our lives, and stop believing in these fairy tales. See you next week. Stronghold. How would you respond to something like that? I was a freshman in college. Not only had I never met anyone that didn't believe in the soul, but I had never met anyone that gave an argument against it. And Scripture says that, Paul says if Christianity is not true, then if the resurrection didn't happen, Christianity isn't true. Well, the problem is if there's no soul, there can also be no resurrection. And once again, if there's no resurrection, Christianity can't be true. So how do I answer something like this objection that my professor was giving me? That if something physical can affect the immaterial, how can that be? Yet we find no evidence of the immaterial, and the fact that something physical can affect our mental states mean that the mind is not physical and there is no soul, which means there's no resurrection, there's no Christianity. How do you respond? Well, guys, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. If you want the answer, you can go on my website and check it out there. And thank you. 2 people laugh. I appreciate that. I know it's a little early. No, I'm kidding. Let's go over these one by one. There's a lot we could say to each one. But looking at the first one, someone who holds to a postmodern view would say something like, there is no truth. This is fairly simple to respond to. And I had people tell me this before. I used to work at a school, and one lady said, well, yeah, there's no truth. I said, really? She said, yeah. I said, is that true? Because if you're telling me that there is no truth, yet you're asserting to me that what you're saying is true, then what you're saying altogether can't be true coherently. In fact, in philosophy, it's what we call self-defeating. I used to live in Houston before I moved to Dallas to be with the Baptist General Convention of Texas. And a pastor friend of mine who I did debates at his church. In fact, I did a debate on the soul, an entire 2-hour debate on the soul. And he started this Christian program on a secular liberal radio station. In fact, what was interesting is that this secular liberal radio station that was very well known around Houston and still going today, basically wanted to be more inclusive. So they invited a pastor to come on and start a show. Well, I got a message once, and they said, what we like to do is once a month, we like to pick somebody from the community, and there's 1 hour out of the week that everybody is always listening in. And what we do is once a month is we pick someone from the community to highlight or talk about what they do. And we want to start being more inclusive of other positions. So would you mind coming on to the radio for an hour live and talking about Christianity and what you do? I said, I'd love to. When we were about to walk into the door, he said, oh, by the way, last time we had a pastor on, and we got like 1 or 2 calls. Some people usually call in, but it depends on the topic if they're interested or not. Would you mind taking calls? You might not. The last guy got like 1 or 2, but would you mind taking calls if people called in? I said, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. So we get in there. I'm about 5 minutes or so into just talking about what I do and then explaining half of an argument that I'm going to go over tomorrow, saying that Christianity is true and here's why. And as I'm about 5 to 7 minutes into my argument, he stops me and says, I know you're not done yet, but all the phone lines are ringing. Would you like to take a call? I said, well, I haven't finished yet, but yeah, let's do it. One lady, she calls in, and she basically, this was a gentleman called in, and he says, who are you to tell people that they're wrong? He said, I was with you, I was okay with you saying that you believed in God, but then you started saying that Christianity is the only true religion. Now, are you saying every other religion is wrong, and Christianity is the only way? I said, yeah. Well, who are you to tell people they're wrong? And he was actually, kind of being smug about it. And then I said, well, hold on, sir. Well, just let me ask you a question. Are you telling me that it's wrong to tell people that they're wrong? He said, yes, you shouldn't be doing that. I said, okay. Well, quick question. I said, then why are you calling me on a live public radio to tell me that I'm wrong? I said, let's go to the next caller. Another lady called in, and she said, well, Christians are so intolerant. You're bigoted. You're hateful. You're homophobic and this and that, and you can't be doing that. And they started getting kind of loud. And I said, well, ma'am, calm down. Are you saying that we should tolerate everybody's beliefs? And she said, yes. You shouldn't neglect or be exclusive. We should tolerate everyone's beliefs. I said, okay. I said, quick question. Then why aren't you tolerating my intolerance? If we're supposed to tolerate everybody's beliefs. Now, there's a lot more to say to that, but I can assure you there are people who hold to views like this, and they will be hindered from coming to the foot of the cross to salvation or to a deeper knowledge and relationship with God because of these strongholds. The other one is Scientism. This one's very rampant, and if I had time, I wish I could go through how these views have even infiltrated the church, but this view that says science is the only way to gain knowledge about reality. Well, first of all, it's not even true. I've talked to people who hold to this, and I say, so if science is the only way to gain knowledge about reality, I said, can you use science to discover whether or not truth exists? They said, yeah, we can do tests, and we can do, analyze. I said, no, well, hold on. But by doing those tests, are you not already presupposing that your very results will either be true or false? Yeah, that's the very thing you're trying to discover. Because, see, things like truth is not something that can be discovered scientifically. It's not as if I write the word truth on a piece of paper, throw it in a Bunsen burner, pour some water, stir it, let it burn. If it turns blue, we're good. Truth exists. It's not the kind of thing that can be assessed through that. Same thing with morality. And, again, don't have time to go into that. But here's another interesting thing is when someone would say something like, well, I can only believe what science tells me. Well, here's a problem with that. The very statement that I can only believe what science tells me is itself not something that science can tell you. In fact, that's not even a scientific statement, but rather it's a philosophical statement about the nature of science. So, the irony is, since your very belief is a philosophical belief about science and not strictly a scientific one, then by your own standards you can't believe it. Which is to say that if scientism is true, then by default scientism can't be true and scientism is false, which is, again, self-defeating. Now, what about this one here, naturalism? Physical world is all that exists, nothing more, nothing less. What my professor was saying about the antidepressant pill, and then people would go as far as to say, well, what about brain damage? Is it not the case that if you get brain damage, you can lose things like your memory? Alzheimer's affects memory, even affects personality. Because, see, I would argue that consciousness is not physical, and that your mind is contained within your soul, and your soul's not physical. But yet, how is that possible if affecting my brain can affect things like my thoughts and memory? Well, there's lots to say about this, but the first thing I want to do is to establish a few things. Now, if what my professor was saying is true, he's essentially having to reduce the mind to nothing more than something physical like the brain. Bear with me here, because we're about to do like a quick crash course in what's called metaphysics. Now, if the mind is the same thing as the brain, then whatever is true of one must be true of the other. It's like saying the speaker this morning is the same person as Eric Hernandez. Well, yes, because you're just using two different titles to refer to me. Now, this is known as the law of identity, and I want to explain this really quick. It's an important concept to understand. Suppose I walk into a lab and I see two bottles of clear fluid, and one is labeled water, one is labeled chemical X. I want to know, are they identical? In philosophy, identity means the same thing as. And I see that they both possess the property of being clear substances, so I say, well, so far I think they are the same substance. But then I turn over chemical X and it says caution flammable. And I think, okay, well, wait a minute. I know that water's not flammable, which means even if I don't know what chemical X is, at the very least I know that they cannot be the same thing. Are you with me? Okay. With this in mind, is it the case that the mind is the same thing as the brain? Well, let's find out and look through what's called the law of identity. First, I'd say no, because causal dependence is not the same thing as identity. Because before we go into investigating that, identity is a separate relation between cause or dependence, and let me explain that. Suppose I'm the greatest guitar player in the world, which I'm not. In fact, I was a drummer. I played in a Christian metal band for like 8 years or so. Right on, yeah. Thank you. That's what I get a clap for. Awesome, yeah, I appreciate that. You can actually go online, look up at Calvary. I think Reverb Nation, our music's still out there. Suppose I was the greatest guitar player, but my guitar string broke, or someone detuned my guitar. This would affect the way I am able to play music or affect the music that I play, which means there's a causal or dependent relationship between the musician and his instrument when it comes to conveying music. But just because you can show a dependent or causal relationship, does it follow that therefore the guitar and the guitarist are the same thing? No, of course not. But let's suppose that if you popped enough strings, I could no longer play the note C. Well, just because I can't play the note C, does it follow that therefore, if you cracked open the guitar, you would actually find the note C? No, of course not. It's not as if the musician gets up and he's about to play worship and says, time out, I think the note C fell out of my car, let me run to my car and grab it. Well, no, because it's not in there, although there's a causal dependent relationship. I would say the same applies with the mind and the mind and brain. In other words, I have no problem saying that these things are caused, affected, or dependent on something else, but it does not go as far as to establish that they're the same thing. Now, I have, again, no issue saying that you can have things like antidepressant pill or brain damage affect the states of my mind or consciousness, but it doesn't follow they're the same thing. Why? Why is the mind the same thing as brain? Because, as I said earlier, because cause or dependence is not the same thing as identity. If the soul does exist, and the mind is in the soul, then it uses the brain much like an instrument, much like a guitarist would use a guitar. But what about that deeper question? Are they the same thing, though? I was having a conversation once with an atheist, and here's an argument that I like to use when it comes to this. Talking to an atheist once, and I said, would you agree with me that if atheism is true, there should be no non-physical things that exist? You know, no spirits, no angels, no demons, just purely physical things. He said, yeah, I agree with that. I said, okay. And I'm thinking, that's all I needed. Good, we got him. That would also then imply, by default, that if something non-physical did exist, then atheism couldn't be true. He says, okay. I said, well, let me put it differently. If atheism is true, consciousness has to be reducible to something like the brain. But if the mind and brain are not identical, then it would follow that consciousness can't be physical. And if consciousness can't be physical, then atheism can't be true. So the question obviously is consciousness physical? Can the mind be reduced to nothing more than the brain? Let me show you why this is important. Let me ask you a quick question. Point to what part of your body thinks. I see some people doing this. So I'm assuming brain. Do you need a brain to think? Let me ask you this question. Does God have a brain? No, we're not Mormons. He's not physical, right? How does he do it? Hey, are you made in his image? Huh. Is the mind the same thing as the brain? Well, let's look. It's not, and it's really easy to do using the law of identity. You take the states of the mind, take the states of the brain, and you look at their properties. The states of my mind, such as my thoughts can be true or false, but it makes no sense to open up my skull, look at my brain, and say this part right here is true, but over here it's false. It's a category fallacy. My brain can weigh 3 pounds, but the thought that I'm speaking here at chapel this morning does not weigh 3 pounds. You may be having heavy thoughts right now, but you're not going to go out and buy a neck brace after this, right? Your brain can be 7 inches long, but the smell of a rose or the taste of a banana, which is in my mind, is not 7 inches long. Now, I can go through about a dozen more examples of this, But it follows from this that if all the properties of the brain are physical and all the properties of the mind are not physical, then if consciousness exists, it can't be physical. So I said, so Mr. Atheist, if you are indeed conscious and you want to be an atheist, but consciousness is not physical, then it follows that if consciousness exists, you shouldn't be an atheist. That was his reaction too. Now, it's ironic because a lot of atheists realize this conclusion, and they go as far as to say someone like Daniel Dennett, atheist philosopher, says, well, consciousness is an illusion. Wrote an entire book called Consciousness Explained. And he was even criticized by other atheists saying, well, you're just explaining consciousness away. But he'll say, no, consciousness is just an illusion. Of course, you can't help to think of whether or not he was conscious when he wrote that, right? The irony, of course, also is that in order to have illusions, you have to first be conscious. So if consciousness is an illusion, there's some consciousness that exists. Now, I'd love to go a lot deeper into this, but as I said, these worldviews have infiltrated not just our culture, but our church. When I ask you what part of your body thinks, you point to the brain. Why? Why are you led to believe that everything must be reduced to something physical? Because, see, it's as if we come to school in some areas or areas of science and we learn that we want to keep a separation of church and state, so let's not bring anything spiritual into the mix. Let's be neutral, so we're going to reduce everything to something physical by physical explanation, which actually does the opposite and just goes to the other spectrum. And then we think the brain thinks, and then we come to church, and then we worship a God that thinks and has no brain, and we're created in his image, and yet we never let these two sets of beliefs meet. And we wonder why we're not very influential in our culture. Strongholds. I'll share this last story with you about my professor. About 5 years after I graduated, to try and condense the story in like 2 minutes, I was invited by the chairman of the philosophy department. He said, hey, we're going to have this roundtable discussion on religion, and we're looking for somebody to represent Christianity. Would you like to do it? We're going to have about 4 different people on stage. I said, I'd love to. I said, out of curiosity, who's going to be on the panel? He said, well, this professor, and Professor Pena, my former professor. I was like, oh, it's fantastic. It went great. For the entire time, there was 4 people on stage, but only 2 were talking, me and him, going back and forth. About a year later, a pastor had heard about this and saw this and approached us individually and said, would you guys mind coming to my church and debating one-on-one whether or not God exists? I said, yeah, I'd love to. That'd be great. About a week before the debate, he calls me and says, the church was going to let us use the main sanctuary, but they don't think a lot of people are going to show up. Is it okay if they put you in the gym for the debate? I said, that's fine, whatever you guys want. I get there about an hour early the day of the debate, and I walk in, and there's about 200 chairs pulled out, and he said they don't anticipate a lot of people are going to come, so they pulled out 200 chairs. If we need more, we can pull more out, but they don't think they'll need it. I go to the back to pray, study, go over my notes. About 15 minutes before the debate starts, I peek my head out the door, and I see that all those 200 chairs were full. They had pulled out 200 more chairs. Those chairs were full. People are standing around the walls and standing in the back, and people are still walking in. It's about 700 people that showed up that day because of how influential this professor was. And that day, there were more atheists than Christians at church that showed up. I wish I can keep going, but my time is out. I want to just leave you with this. There are strongholds in our culture. If you want to be effective in evangelism and spiritual warfare, you have to engage in this. That's the task and branch of philosophy and apologetics. I appreciate you guys. Tomorrow we're going to go over evidence of God. We're having a student Q&A luncheon today at 12. I hope to see you there. Y'all are dismissed. Thank you.